Alright, welcome to the Freedom Unchained channel. Another lesson from George Gordon, Common Law School. This one is more about the right to travel and how it all came about and how you should act if you want to act as a free man or a man, not a slave, on the roads and practice your right to go from point A to point B. A lot of people are interested in the right to travel, but they don't understand that the government doesn't give them the right. It's the position you take as man that gives you the right to have your freedoms. So please, if you haven't started in the beginning of this lesson or the beginning of the course, please go to the playlist that will be in the description right at the top. Click on the playlist and watch from the beginning so you can get a good understanding of what common law is and how you act as man. Or he calls it a natural person, but I say natural persons and men are different. I think, is calling a man a natural person. But a person cannot be natural because a person is created. A person is a persona. It's a mask. It's not a creation of God. Man is a creation of God. That's how you get your rights, because if you are a man, then you get your rights from God, not the government. Please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Please comment. Share the video around to all your slave buddies that haven't become free yet, or haven't realized that they are slaves and they need to become free, because a lot of people haven't become free yet, but they're working on it. They're trying to figure it out. If you're the one trying to figure it out, you need your friends to jump on board to be free, so it becomes easier for everybody else to become free. Once we deprogram everybody, then share this video around. Let's help out all of our other friends and family in the communities that we live. And so let's just get to it.
And that's wrapped up in this thing called status and what we call status to contract. So let me start off and explain to you why it is that some people need driver's licenses. There was a time when we didn't have them. And when you didn't have one and you were driving along in your old car, your 1910 Peerless or your 1910 Model T Ford, you didn't have a driver's license. And you were driving as a matter of right, using liberty under the Constitution to go from point A to point B. And then somebody came along and said, gosh, wouldn't it be interesting or nifty or nice? And I call this now the insurance scam. And so somebody went to an insurance company, or let's say it was a salesman in the insurance company, and he goes in, and naturally all corporate business is interested in making money, and somebody had to say, well, how can we increase profits and cut costs? What we need here, let me make a suggestion. I'll tell you what we need. We need to insure all these new horseless carriages. Yeah, if we could insure all these horseless carriages, boy, there's a burgeoning market there. I predict that we're going to move from horses and wagons to automobiles. And so the man goes out and he starts selling policies on horseless carriages and automobiles. Now, the more of these horseless carriages and automobiles that pack the roads, then the more accidents and therefore the more claims, right? So somewhere, let's say around 1910, let's start out, we're going to start selling insurance policies in 1900 to people who have horseless carriages. About 1910, you go into the boardroom of the insurance company, and what do you see? Somebody's in there saying, how can we cut costs and increase profits? I noticed the biggest claims problem that we have are these automobiles that come to intersections, and one of them doesn't stop or doesn't see the other one, and he goes into the intersection, and bang, there's a crash in the intersection. I think what we need is the stop sign law. If we had a law that put stop signs at these intersections, I think that we could cut down on those accidents, and that would cut down on the claims and the losses at the insurance claims window, and that would increase our profits, and it would make us more profit. Well, how are we going to affect that? Oh, I know what we'll do. We'll go up to the legislature and we'll lobby these legislators up here, and we'll show them a bunch of real pictures of death and carnage. We'll show them pictures of arms that are cut off by people that went through the windshield in these accidents. And we'll lobby and we'll tell them, for the health, safety, and welfare of the people, under the police powers, we need these stop signs. Pretty soon you got stop sign laws. All right? Now, that cuts down on accidents there. Now what do you need? Well, along about 1920, let's say, somebody comes in and they say, well, now what can we do to increase profits and cut costs? So the insurance industry says, gosh, that's interesting. Well, let's see. What's the biggest single thing that costs us money? Well, these automobiles drive awful fast. So we need some traffic regulation. We've got to have a line down the middle of the road, and we've got to have speed limits, and we've got to have signs that show us curves. And we're going to call these traffic regulations. Oh, how do we get those passed? Well, we go to the legislature, and we show them a lot of pictures of death and destruction and carnage on the highway. And we'll do it in the name of the people to protect the people's health, safety, and welfare under the police powers. Oh, and we're doing it with the noblest of intentions. Okay, so now you go up to the legislature. This is the insurance industry. They show them the picture, and they have the public hearings, and they go through all the processes, and now they pass these laws called regulations. All right? Well, nobody objects too much to that. And so pretty soon somebody comes along and says, now, how can we increase profits and cut costs? Well, we notice that people between the ages of, 15 and 25 have the most accidents and the highest rates of claims. What we need is a system where we can keep records on these drivers. And what we'll do is we'll propose a licensing law. And we'll claim that people who aren't licensed are a menace on the road, and that what we need is the licensing to establish qualifications for competency. Who's going to argue about that? You don't want incompetent drivers out there on the road, do you? All right, so we pass the licensing law at some point in time, and then we start to keep records. And what we'll do to get people to go down and get these licenses, we'll offer lower insurance rates to licensed drivers and higher insurance rates to unlicensed drivers. Well, 10 years goes by and we come up to 1930, let's say, or something like that. And now we've got this uniform licensing law, coast to coast, border to border, wall to wall. Everybody's got a license. Now what we need to do is we've got to have stricter enforcement of the traffic regulations, and so what we need to propose is that we codify these and call them misdemeanors, and we've got to dish out some punishments for these traffic offenders who are killing people by speeding and drunk driving and doing these violations of law. So we'll codify those. Here again, here's your insurance industry going into the legislature, and they go through the hearings, and they never do this in the name of profits to protect the claims window of the insurance industry. They always do this in the name of health, safety, and welfare, police powers. We're doing this to protect you, Mr. John Q. Public, from those drunk drivers out there, those wicked, evil, terrible, awful people. Okay? Now, next step is, now we've got everybody licensed. Now what we need is the mandatory insurance law. And the reason we need a mandatory insurance law is this. There's these irresponsible people out there, and they drive their cars, and they run into people, and then they don't have any insurance, and they can't pay the medical bills, and they can't pay the hospital, and they can't pay for the damages they cause. So what we need is a universal insurance program. So what we're going to do is we'll pass a law, and we'll put this in the traffic code. Now here in Idaho it's called Title 49, and it's called the Mandatory Insurance Law. You've got to carry proof of insurance, and you have to have insurance on your car. All right? Now we'll carry that a step further. How do we increase profits and cut costs? Say this is 1950 or 60. I can remember how this came down. What we need to do is to educate our youth. We need to take traffic safety into the schools and have a driver's education program. We've got to get to these young people and teach them how to get a driver's license, how to register their car, how to get insurance, in other words, in short, how to train these young people to be slaves when they're age 14. And so you license the kid when he's 14 or 15 or 16. You make it a requirement to graduate from high school that he have this driver's training and driver's education. He gets out of school. You've never taught him anything about the Constitution. You've never taught him anything about rights, inalienable rights versus privilege, and so now we've got a perfect slave. He's created and designed by his government to be a perfect taxpayer. All right, now, if he violates or breaks any rules or regulations, what happens? Oh, you take him into the traffic court and you fine him in a penal statute. Use a penal or a penalty or a contractual penalty for violating the terms and conditions of the contract. Now, on our streets and highways today, we have a virtual police state tyranny. That's a fact. The police stop you. They can search your car. They don't need any Fourth Amendment warrant whatsoever. They can arrest you and throw you in jail for drunk driving, and then you can worry about how you're going to prove that you weren't drunk, whether you are or not. And listen, I can categorize and tell you some of the most tear-jerking horror stories of people that have been entrapped and charged with felonies and put in the penitentiary. Did they hurt anybody? No. Nobody was damaged. Nobody was hurt. But here they are in prison for drunk driving, maybe the second or third time, and the guy has never had an accident. And I want to talk to you about that in a moment, and I'll show you how that works. The traffic court's sole function and purpose is to protect the profitability of the insurance industry. It isn't there for any other purpose. And if you know of any, you can write and let me know, would you? I'd like to know what it is. Now, the goals, are altruistic and magnanimous, and of course, we don't want people killed on the roads. And so we've got this big kick now. We're going to put all drunk drivers in prison. And I've got to lay this story on you because, when it comes to logic, reason, and common sense, sometimes what I hear up here in my legislature just befuddles me. Well, here's some statistics that I saw the other day up in the legislature. I went up there, and here in Idaho, they're going to pass this strict drunk driving law. The second time you're caught drunk driving, you don't have to kill anybody, have an accident, or do anything. Just go get a few drinks in you and drive down the road. The policeman stops you, gives you a ticket, go and plead guilty, pay a $300 fine, come back. Let it happen again, we're going to charge you with a felony. And here's what they're proposing. You go, or not what they're proposing, that's what they're proposing now. What I'm suggesting that you listen to here's what some of the testimony was about. This one lady gets up and she says, now listen, there was 52,000 people killed last year. 26,000 of those deaths were alcohol-related. And we've just got to do something about these drunk drivers because, boy, I'm telling you, they're just killing people and there's just carnage on the road, and we've just got to do something about these lethal weapons called automobiles driving down the road with these drunks in them and these alcoholics and these wicked and evil people. All right. So I'm listening to all this. I listened to 18 people testify in 2 hours and a half, and every one of those people had a financial interest in alcoholism. There were non-profit corporations that did drug and alcohol evaluations. There was the Attorney General, who's a part of the law enforcement growth industry. He prosecutes people and has about 50 prosecutors that prosecute drunk drivers. Then there's the prison out here. They've got to warehouse these criminals, and they've got beds to fill so that they've got guards to employ guarding people out there. And there's the insurance industry, of course, and then the medical industry is interested in these drunk drivers also. They make money off of alcohol evaluation. And then there's these alcohol clinics, where you go in and draw out. Not one drunk came in to testify. Didn't see one. And I'm sitting there, I'm just watching all this, and I'm going, God, 26,000. Okay, well, wait a minute. I sat there for a little bit, and my mind works differently than bureaucrats. It works differently than politicians. And I'm sitting there, and I'm saying, now let me see if I understand this. For some reason, we've got to pass legislation and call drunkenness a felony. And we're going to lock this guy up in prison for 5 years. That's right. Felonies, 5 years in jail. Do you know what it costs to put a man in prison for 5 years in Idaho? $15,000 a year. See how much that is. 15, 30, 45, 60, $75,000. My God, do you understand how much money that is? You got this drunk out here, and some of these people are testifying that alcoholism is a illness. It's a disease. And we're going to put these 6 sick people out here in the penitentiary for 5 years for $75,000. And right away I'm saying, wait a minute. I could send that guy to Harvard twice for that kind of money and turn him into a medical doctor or a lawyer or something for that kind of money. You know, listen, if I got a guy driving down the road drunk and I wanted to get him off the road, why don't, instead of paying $75,000 to lock him up in prison, why don't we give him $50,000 and tell him to go to Brazil? We'd save $25,000 and we'd get rid of the guy. And we'd make money and he'd be happier down there. He'd have $50,000 to blow. He could practically retire. Okay, we got to have law and order and we got to get these drunks off the road. So we got 26,000 of them alcohol related. So I'm sitting here saying, you know, my father was killed in a head-on traffic crash in 1970. Now I'll tell you, I was really upset about that. This fella crossed the center line of the road about 4:30 in the afternoon in broad daylight, trying to pass a truck, and he didn't have enough clearance. And he ran right into my father, and he killed him. My father went right through the windshield and broke his neck and killed him. And I'll tell you what really galls me, the guy was stone sober. Didn't have a drink. Didn't help my dad any. Killed him. So right away I'm sitting here in this committee and I'm listening to this diatribe and I'm saying to myself, wait a minute. What is it? Listen to this. 26,000 are alcohol related. Well, then 26,000 of them aren't alcoholic related, are they? Why don't we fund a study for the 26,000 that are non-alcoholic related and find out how many of the 26,000 drivers who were not drunk had blonde hair and blue eyes, and find out if there's a correlation between blonde hair and blue eyes and traffic accidents and deaths on the highway. Looks like it makes about that much sense to me. The one thing that was totally absent in all the testimony was how many of those drunks that were alcohol, or those deaths that were alcohol related, were caused by the drunk. You know, there was a famous Supreme Court case came down in New Mexico about 10 years ago. And this farmer is driving down the road in his old battered pickup, just bombed out of his mind. He was so drunk, he couldn't walk. That's probably why he was driving. And he had a bottle of whiskey about 2/3 empty in the jockey box. And he's driving down the road and there's an accident. There's a head-on crash. A doctor, his wife, and his 2 children from Houston, Texas, who were going on holiday to Los Angeles, killed. Farmer survived. That's the way it usually happens. The drunk survives, and this wonderful family, a man, his wife, and his 2 children killed. The problem here was that the doctor fell asleep, crossed the center line, and hit the farmer head on. Now let me ask you, is that wreck and that death alcohol related? Oh yeah, you bet. Farmer's drunk? But is the farmer the cause of the accident, or is the farmer who was drunk the victim? And what none of these people tell you is that, well, yeah, who's ever funded a study to find out whether or not drunkenness is the cause of the accidents that cost these lives? They'll cite you a few cases where the guy is drunk, ran the red light, ran into this blonde-haired, blue-eyed, 20-year-old young woman just out of college or whatever, and ruined her life, and, we got to do something about this guy because it's the 5th time. Well, maybe so. But that's 1 out of 25,000. There's still another 25,999 that we've got to analyze. But for some reason we want to zero in on this one group over here. Now, why do we want to zero in on one group? To protect the claims window of the insurance industry. I don't care if you drive down the road drunk. My father never took a sober breath for the last 20 years, and he never had an accident drunk. He had several wrecks sober, never had a wreck drunk. Now, I'm not sitting here telling you that you should drive drunk. I don't know whether you should or not. I'm just telling you that I'm suspicious when I see people testify before a Senate and House Joint Committee in my state trying to get some kind of legislation passed, and they're sitting here railing against some particular group of people that have this or that particular financial motivation involved. Listen, if you're running a nonprofit corporation in Idaho and it's to rehabilitate Alcoholics Anonymous, or here's Alcoholics Anonymous was in there testifying. These people work for these organizations, and while the organization's tax exempt, they get their salaries and make their livings doing that, don't they? Well, if they're getting their salaries and making their livings doing that, then they have a financial interest involved, don't they? And John Q. Public, the average drunk, he doesn't make any money off of it, so he doesn't go up and testify. Oh, now I see how that goes. All right, let's carry this on a step further. The purpose for having driver's licenses is to regiment all of the people into a little group that can be regulated under the police powers separate from their constitutional rights. Now, I said, I'm not really concerned about you driving drunk, am I? I've only got a 50% chance of being killed if you're drunk. I still stand the same 50% chance of getting killed if you're sober. And I'm just as dead whether you're drunk or sober. It doesn't make any difference whether a drunk kills me or a sober guy kills me. And what you're doing is creating this police state environment, giving the police these broad new powers to set up, and they're talking about setting up roadblocks. I mean, these people are so off the wall when it comes to our constitutional guarantees. They're so emotionally involved in their religious philosophy or their moral philosophy, whatever it is, that they want to set up roadblocks to run all these drunks off the road. I'll bet you there's more people that drink in this country than don't drink, and if all you people out there that drink don't want to be involved in this massive, masochist-type police state, Gestapo-type society where we're going to just create this communist one-world government right here in our own land for the sole purpose of eradicating drunks. Well, let's think about it for a minute. The insurance company probably has figured that if they could get rid of a certain number of drunk drivers or drinking drivers or whatever it may be, they may save a little money. I don't know who came in. Somebody came into the boardroom and they said, hey, I'll tell you, these drunks over here are costing us a lot of money at the claims window. What we need to do is do something about them. And so the president and a few other people get out there and they start beating the tom-toms, and then they start going to the legislature and they start getting these laws passed. Now, personally, I don't really care. I don't have a driver's license. I don't come under Title 49, so I don't have to be concerned about it. But boy, let me tell you, all you licensed people out there better get real concerned about it. If I'm concerned about you with your $100 car running into my $30,000 Porsche, I don't need any legislation to protect me from you. If I'm real concerned about it, it's up to me to go out and insure my $30,000 Porsche against irresponsible people who do not have insurance and who are poor and cannot pay for my $30,000 Porsche. And if you're the poor guy and you've got the $100 car, are you real concerned about my $30,000 Porsche crashing into your 1962 Buick Skylark and wrecking it? So you go out and pay $100 and you buy another car, right? You're not real concerned about it. And besides that, if I got a $30,000 Porsche and the wreck's my fault, I probably have $100 and can probably pay you, right? I don't know where this logic comes from, but you know, we citizens don't go out buying insurance policies for people for fear that, or compelling them to buy insurance policies for fear that when they die they'll leave their family on welfare, do we? And if government can compel you to buy an insurance policy, can't they compel you to buy a waterbed, or compel you to buy a certain type of carpet, or compel you to buy a TV set? The government cannot compel you into a contract against your will and over your objection pursuant to Article 1, Section 10. Well, then how do they do that? By statute under Title 49 in the Traffic Code. Well, that's easy. You volunteered to do that. You got a driver's license in your pocket. How can the government come in and tell you that you have to have a building permit and that you have to build your house in a certain way, a certain method? And it's going to be inspected and it's going to be regulated, and if you don't do this, you're a criminal, we'll put you in jail. You know, right over here in Emmett, Idaho, a fellow went to jail for 5 days for building his own house without a building permit. Was there ever a time in America when you could go out and build something on your own property and you didn't need your government's permission? Yeah, there was. It was when the citizens were responsible for their actions and not someone else. Yeah, that's right. When you're ready to become responsible for your own actions, then you can be free. Because incompetent people are not responsible for their own actions, are they? An incompetent person has a guardian, doesn't he? Don't your children at 10 years old have a guardian? Don't you tell your kid that you'll come in at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and if you don't, there's a penal statute here called a belt, and we'll whip you until you get it straight? All right? Do you know that in America today, we have a police state environment that we Americans bought and paid for? You know, the Poles and the Czechs can complain about their slavery being enforced upon them at gunpoint by the Russians. But not us Americans. You didn't have anybody come over here with a gun and force you to go get a driver's license or compel you to go get a building permit or compel you into this mercantile equity. We volunteered for it. We bought and paid for it. We went to the insurance company and paid them dollars and cents to take our freedom from us. Now let me show you how this works with the Garrett. I like to use Garrett truck lines because they come in and out of Boise, Idaho, and they're pretty much all over the United States. Here's how mercantile equity works. Outside here we have what's called a right-of-way. That's a road. That belongs to the people. Garrett is a paper entity, and Garrett's a corporation. They have no natural inalienable rights. So when Garrett wants to use that road out there, remember, the sovereign is the legislature. The sovereign legislature created Garrett. Garrett is then using that road for profit and gain, aren't they? They're using it in privilege. And if they use it in privilege, they have to pay us, the sovereign citizens, a tax for the privilege of using that thing in interstate commerce. We, the citizens, own it. We don't pay for it. We own the thing. And we don't want to pay for something that we already own, now do we? You don't pay to park your car in your garage. You pay to park it in somebody else's garage because it's a privilege, but to park it in your garage isn't. When Garrett uses that road, it's a privilege to them, and they pay tax on it. Well, let's start back about 1900. When a man owned his house, he owned the land, he owns his car, he doesn't have to pay tax on it. He owns it in fee simple or in allodial absolute title. Today, you don't know too many people that do that. People live now in equitable interest. They don't own their homes, they have an equitable interest in them. They call themselves homeowners, and that's a misnomer. I don't know very many homeowners. When I was a youngster, 10 years old, nearly everybody I knew owned their own home. I mean, that thing was bought and paid for. In 1940, $3,000 would build a nice 3-bedroom house. And when a man got the $3,000, he went out and he built the house and he owned the thing in fee simple. All right, now, we don't do that. Today we go out and put $3,000 down of our inflated Federal Reserve notes, and we mortgage or indenture ourselves to specific performance for 30 years. Well, corporations have no rights, and corporations can be taxed for the privileges, and those are called excise taxes. So the bank owns your house, or the mortgage company, or whoever owns it, and by contract they pass that on to you. That's right. When you signed that contract for 30 years, you agreed to pay the property taxes, and you agreed to insure the house for the entire time, and if you don't, then the bank just does it for you, and then they add that onto your payments, don't they? All right, same thing on the highways. We don't own our automobiles, and so therefore GMAC owns your car. And the legislature has passed traffic laws, rules, and regulations governing the use of automobiles. Well, GMAC doesn't have any rights. And so the statute says that the car has to be registered, has to be licensed, and only licensed drivers can drive it. Go to Hertz and try to rent a car. Tell them you don't have a driver's license and see if they'll rent you a car. Why is it that only a licensed driver can drive a Hertz car? Well, because the statute says so. Now, those statutes attach to each and every one of those corporate entities. Every one of those persons in mercantile equity have to obey the statutes. Now, You go down and you buy the car from the Ford dealer. The Ford dealer then sells the paper to GMAC. You've agreed in this contractual agreement that you will obey all the rules and regulations and laws and etc. And so you have to be licensed, the car has to be registered, and you have to carry insurance. And that's all it attaches to. Because you cannot tax a right. The power to tax is the power to destroy. We can tax Garrett right out of existence, and there's nothing they can do about it. But you can't tax the individual out of existence because the individual is a sovereign. The individual has natural, inalienable rights guaranteed by the common law under the Constitution. So don't you see what happens to you? You go down and you buy the car, and now by contractual arrangement you have given up your constitutional rights for privilege in mercantile equity. And so now you come under the statute because the corporation, through its contract, has imposed it upon you. And now we have our government out here licensing free and natural persons as well as corporate persons. You don't have to be, but nearly everybody has volunteered. Now the poor policeman's out here trying to enforce the law. Look at his problem from his perspective. He's been to the government school. He doesn't understand the Constitution or inalienable rights. All he understands is statute and law. Police regulations. The guy's been in the Army. He was in the Marines for a few years. Maybe he was an MP. He comes out. All he knows is, sit down and shut up. Do this, do that, jump up, come here, go there. He doesn't understand freedom. He's been a slave all his life. That's all the military service is it's voluntary servitude, and you get in there, you sign the contract, and there you are at the captain's mast on the bridge of the ship. Here's the way that comes down. You have two crewmen down in the engine room, and they have a fight. Do they have any constitutional rights out on the high seas? That's admiralty jurisdiction. You take them up to a captain's mast. He just sits there and says, well, who started this fight? And he asks questions. Are there any Fifth Amendment rights? Are there Fourth Amendment rights? No. Why he just says, I'm confining you fellows to quarters and I'm going to fine you so much and blah, blah, blah. And that's the end of that argument. Well, what happens when a passenger on the ship gets in a fight with a crewman and they haul the passenger and the crewman up to the captain's mast? Well, if they haul this passenger up there and say, hold it, Captain, you got a problem here. I'm not one of the crew. I'm not one of the fellows you have jurisdiction over. You don't have any jurisdiction over me. I'm challenging your jurisdiction. I'm a paying passenger. I'm a sovereign. You put me off at the next port and we'll talk about common law rights. And that's where you are on the road. You see, Garrett has to stop at the port of entry. Garrett trucks and all these other trucks that are operating in interstate commerce for profit or gain, using our roads, have to pay tax. Let's try this on to the independent trucker. The independent trucker takes $5,000. He goes down and he puts $5,000 down on a truck, and now he owes GMAC or somebody a bunch of money, doesn't he? He doesn't own that thing in fee simple. Now he needs a load, right? So he goes down here to a broker and he goes out and gets a job. And so he goes over to let's call it the Acme Lumber Company. And with a bill of lading, he takes a load of lumber from Idaho and he's going to take it to Texas. So he's going to act in interstate commerce. He's acting in interstate commerce as a matter of privilege for profit or gain on the roads. We have to control him. How do we know he's not going to steal the lumber and run to California and sell it? Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress power to regulate interstate commerce, and here's a fellow that's acting in interstate commerce for profit or gain, and he's regulatable. And he better stop down here at the port of entry, and he better clear, and he better pay duties, and he better pay his taxes, and he better not be overloaded, and if he is, he's going to go into the captain's mast or summary proceedings. He has to be licensed. His truck has to be licensed. He has to have insurance. We know how that works. Works that way day in, day out, doesn't it? How would a man operate then if he wanted to operate in the trucking business from Idaho to New York? Here's the way it works. The Constitution hasn't changed. The Constitution is still in force and effect. What we have to do is we have to correct our status so that we're no longer servants in bondage to free men responsible for their actions. Here's the way that works. You go down here and you buy a truck and you pay cash for it and you own it and you throw the license plates away. Now you're claiming to own this thing and a load you'll fee simple. Now, if you've got a driver's license, turn it back in by affidavit and stop driving as a matter of privilege and start driving as a free man as a matter of right. Now, you got no driver's license and you don't owe any money on the truck, so you're not affecting any corporate entity in any way. Don't insure the truck, because if you insure the truck, then the insurance company is the master and they're responsible for your actions. You've got to be responsible for your own actions. All right? Now you go down and you want to haul a load. Uh-oh. Are you going to go over here to that lumber company with a bill of lading and haul that lumber? No. You can't do that. What you do is you go over and you tender or you pay property for the lumber. Now, you own the load, you own the truck, and you own the road. Can you drive your truck with your property on it on your road? Well, certainly you can. Can you drive it in the several states? Absolutely. You can drive it into every state in the Union. Can you do it for private business? Absolutely. Take the load of lumber over to Los Angeles or Houston and sell it and convert it to something and go down and buy another load and come back. You can do that. That's what I did. Do you know of any people who do that? Well, I don't know of any either. If you're a truck driver out there and you've been complaining about this police state environment, if you want to operate as a free man, you have to be responsible for your actions. And if you think about it for a moment, if the insurance company is responsible for your action, then you're affecting a public interest. And if you affect a public interest, the police powers come into play. And if the police powers come into play, then you're going to be regulated and you're going to be taxed. Now I want to tell you about the Toby story. This is an interesting and a true-to-life characterization of the way our Constitution works, the way it has worked in the past, and the way I hope that it continues to work in the future. Basically, it's this. Remember the story of Roots? It was on TV here a year or two ago. Here was a fellow who was a natural person with inalienable rights living in his own land, and his name was Kunta Kinte. And he exercised all of the rights of sovereignty. He owned property. He was accepted in his community. He wasn't a slave. He wasn't obligated to anybody. He got up in the morning. He went out. He came in as he pleased. He got captured. He became a part of the spoils of war, taken to a new land. His name changed from Kunta Kinte, the sovereign free man, to Toby the slave. Toby then is sold to the master. Look up the word slave here in Bovier's Law Dictionary, and you'll find that a slave is a person. A corporation's a person. A natural citizen is a person. But there are different statuses. There are different powers, rights, obligations, duties, and capacities for different statuses of persons. Bob explained that clearly to you. Bob covered it in detail. Toby has no rights. He doesn't even have a right to live. He has no property rights. He has no right to expect life, liberty, or property. He tries to escape. What do you do when you have a horse that keeps jumping over the fence? What do you do when you have a cow that keeps breaking the fence, or a calf that you can't keep in? I used to have a bull, that I had trouble doing that and kept jumping over the fence. What did we do? We bored a hole through his nose, put a ring in it, and put a 20-foot rope on it. And that stopped him. You have to do something to stop your chattels from running away. Toby ran away, cut his foot off. That stopped him from running away, didn't it? The master had a right to protect his property. Toby was property. All right, now what happens? Toby goes out and he starts picking cotton and he stops running away and he becomes a good slave. The master wants to reward the slave with a privilege. So what's the privilege? He says, Toby, see all those women over there? I'm going to let you take any of those women that you want for a wife. There's the marriage license. There's the privilege. And remember, the word license means the permission to do something that would be otherwise illegal. I ask you, my friend, now what's illegal about getting married? Did you go down to your government and get a license to get baptized? Do you go down to the government and get a license to go to church? Don't you exercise religious rights freely under the First Amendment? Our government puts out marriage licenses. Isn't marriage a religious business? What business has government got in regulating marriage? Yet I tell you, friend, you go out and get a marriage license, and doesn't health and welfare then come into play? And doesn't compulsory education and compulsory attendance to school, and if you're not good, we're going to take your kid away from you? Well, what happened to Toby and his wife when the first baby was born? Who owned that child? Toby and his wife? You got a bull and a cow. A calf is the offspring. Who owns that calf? That's right, the master owns that calf. If you don't think that's true, why don't you take a look at Leviticus 43. There's a whole chapter pursuant to slavery from Scripture. And remember that when the Constitution was formed in 1787, those people were all slave owners, and most of them were religious guys. They understood law, they understood slavery, they understood chattels, they understood mortgages, indenture. You know, it was Benjamin Franklin said it's better to go to bed hungry than to go to bed in debt. He said you better go to bed without your dinner rather than pay money or borrow money to eat dinner and then wake up to be in servitude the following morning. People understood debt. What does Scripture have to say about that? Isn't the debtor servant to the lender? Does it make you wonder why banks want you to be in debt constantly? You've got a house that's free and clear. Why, free up that equity, friend. Come on in and get a $25,000 cash second mortgage and go to Honolulu and squander the money and become our servant for the next 25 years. You know what they've been telling you? Well, look where Toby is. Now he has a wife. Now he's tied to the plantation. He's a family man, and he got permission to do something that a free man would do anyway. You ever heard of a common law wife, a common law marriage? Do you suppose that people always got marriage licenses from the government to get married? Well, was there ever a time when you could get married without a license? Why don't you ask yourself that one? Well, let's carry the story on just a couple of steps. Now, Toby, remember in the story, he was... And so the master came to him and said, Toby, you've been good, you've been picking cotton, and you got a wife, and you're not running away. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you another privilege. How would you like to drive the wagon to town to get the supply? Now, that's a cushy job. Truck drivers like those kind of jobs. Airline pilots like those kind of jobs. Yeah, I like that. And so he put Toby on the wagon, he trained him to the rules of the road, and there was the master's permission to do something that would otherwise be illegal and unlawful. You see, Toby couldn't leave the plantation. He has to have the master's permission. That's the driver's license. There's your privilege. Master-servant relationship. State licenses you to drive on the road. Master-servant relationship. Let me ask you this. Toby is driving the wagon to town. He has an accident. He hits another wagon and he causes some damage. Who is responsible for the damages that Toby causes on that road? It isn't Toby. He's a slave. He doesn't have any property and can't possibly pay for any damage. The person who licensed him, the person who gave him that permission to go out there on the road, the master is responsible for Toby. Well then, when you're out on the road in an insured automobile, an insured truck, who's responsible when you have an accident? The insurance company is responsible. Well, if the insurance company is responsible, isn't the insurance company going to make rules and regulations for you to follow? It makes sense to me. It makes sense to government. It makes sense to everybody. Because you see, when you're insured, you're not responsible for your actions. The insurance company is. If you're going to be free, you have to be responsible for your actions, and that's where the common law comes in, because you see, the common law acts after the fact. The common law does not act in equity prior to the occurrence. When the policeman gives you a ticket for driving 80, he's trying to prevent an accident. That's equity. That's trying to prevent something. That isn't the common law. The common law acts when the damage has occurred. then you sue and you get money damages back. It's when the guy gouges the other guy's eye out that you gouge his eye out after the fact, and that's the common law. Trying to prevent the eye from being gouged out is in the parameters of the insurance company preventing the loss so that they can prevent or protect the claims window. Now that's how your status works. That's how it works with Garrett. That's why you have a driver's license. Let's carry this on another step and look at your status when you're talking about building a house. You go out, you buy a house. You've lived in it a few years and you decide, well, I think we'll convert the garage over into a family room, or I think we'll add another room onto the house. You are? Wait a minute. Who are you affecting? Whose house is that? Yours? Well, that's not your house. You have an equitable interest in that house. You're not a property owner. You are bound by contract to specific performance. You're a servant. You're a slave. A slave to the bank that lent you the money to buy the house. Now, there's a $50,000 house. You have a $10,000 equitable interest in it. The bank has a $40,000 equitable interest, and the house is insured for $50,000. And the insurance company stands to lose $50,000 if the house burns to the ground because you didn't wire it right when you added the room on. In addition to that, the bank is sitting over there saying, I don't want just everybody adding rooms on, creating Tobacco Road tar paper shacks. And the insurance company stands to lose $50,000 if the house burns to the ground because you didn't wire it right when you added the room on. In addition to that, the bank is sitting over there saying, I don't want just everybody adding rooms on, creating Tobacco Road tar paper shacks, depreciating the value of my home that I own, and in case this guy defaults or dies or goes away, I have to repossess and sell to somebody else. And so the banks and the insurance companies and all the big institutions go to the legislature to get zoning laws, to get building laws to protect their property. That makes sense. I mean, listen, if I owned a house and I sold it to you, I certainly want to be protected. I don't want you to add a room onto that house, wire it incorrectly, and have it burn down, and then me lose $40,000 and you lose $10,000. And if I'm the insurer of it, I certainly don't want to lose $50,000 because of your ineptness. And so, you see, a debtor is servant to the lender. The debtor is an incompetent. That's right. Now you're beginning to see why God in the Scripture said the servant is debtor to the lender. You know, in ancient times, if you went into debt and didn't pay, specific performance would bore a hole in your ear and sell you for 7 years until it was paid off. Today we call that bankruptcy. In ancient times they called that slavery. And boy, it could get real severe. You know, if we were at law and had substance at the common law, I'll tell you the common law is pretty brutal. The common law doesn't leave any room for bankruptcy. You're going to pay your debts or you're going to work them off. And crime doesn't pay at the common law because we're not interested in the law enforcement growth industry. We're just interested in justice. You know, you gouge a man's eye out, the old adage of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is common law. And equity is we want to prevent that loss. All right, now I've told you about Garrett and I've told you about Toby. Now let's discuss this law enforcement growth industry a little bit, because the police state environment that we've created around ourselves is really inextricably bound up in this thing that I call the law enforcement growth industry. And this law enforcement growth industry, I don't know how big it is, but let's start with a few parameters and let's take a look at what we're talking about with the subject matter. You've got a lot of policemen out here nationwide, don't you? I don't know how many policemen there are, but there's thousands and thousands and thousands of policemen, maybe 2 or 3 million, right? Now, how do they make their living? Don't they make it off of crime? Don't we have to have lawyers to defend those criminals? And don't we have to have lawyers who become prosecutors to prosecute those criminals? Don't we have to have prisons to house those criminals in? Don't we have to have jails? Don't we have to have sheriffs? Don't we have to have judges? I don't know how many people are involved in law enforcement, but I'll bet you that there's 4 or 5 million. Let's try it this way. Let's suppose that everybody in America starting tomorrow morning refused to disobey any more laws, and nobody would drive drunk, and nobody would build a house without a permit, and everybody obeyed all the laws. We'd have chaos within a week. Well, what would we do? Why, we would have 5 or 6 million unemployed law enforcement people. I don't know how many there are. I wish somebody would let me know. But, boy, I'm telling you, these law schools are graduating law graduates all the time. Every time a lawyer comes out, he has to have a job somewhere, doesn't he? Boy, he has a real interest in law enforcement and crime prevention and crime and punishment. So, I've been in jail a couple, 3 times, and while I go out there, I like to ask people, well, what are you in here for? What did you do? My government puts me in there once in a while because I don't have a driver's license or because my car's not registered and they don't understand my status. And they want to know, well, why are you in here? And I said, well, I'm out here because I don't have a driver's license and I'm a real bad fellow, you know, and I'm a real criminal, and I need, society needs to be protected from me because I want my rights and I want my freedoms, and for demanding these rights and freedoms, why my government locks me up every now and again to protect you from me. And I find that there's other people that are in there also, and I asked a young fellow in there, and I said, well, why are you here? Well, I'm here because I've been convicted on a felony. Felony? What'd you do? Well, I drove drunk. You drove drunk? What happened? Well, last year I was out driving drunk, and the policeman caught me, and they took me over, and they tried me in front of the judge, and I pled guilty, and that was 1. And then 6 months later, I went out and they did the same thing, and that was 2. And about 2 months ago, I was having a big party over at my apartment, and I was drunk and just having a good time, making too much noise, and the police came up and they recognized me, and they said, is that your car down there? Yeah. It's parked too close to a fire hydrant. Go down and move it. So he went down, he moved it, and as soon as he started the car, they arrested him for drunk driving. He fell within the statute, didn't he? He had a driver's license, acting in privilege, drunk, went down, started the motor. Statute says, in control of an automobile, drunk, arrested him, put him in jail. Why'd they do that? Did you need to be protected from that fellow? No, they entrapped him because they need business. You know, in our county, it costs $13.16 a day to keep a man in the county jail. Now, while you're in this county jail, you're locked up in this room, and there's 10 other guys in there. 10 times 13.16 is $130 a day for that little tank. They have to feed you every day, and so they have these uniformed bellboys. They run up and down the hall, and they bring you your food. If they didn't have those beds filled with people, what would you need those jail guards running up and down the halls bringing their meals to them for and guarding them? You see, the jail guards would be unemployed if they didn't have people inside those jails to guard. If the prison wasn't full of people, there wouldn't be any need for the guards, now would there? Now, I'm not telling you that there aren't some bad people in jail. You know, there's some people, I suppose, that may need to be locked up. But my guesstimate is that about 10 or 15% of the people that are in the jails here in Idaho are there because they're entrapped. They're not there because I need to be protected or you need to be protected from them. A guy that's driving down the road drunk, unless he runs into me and causes a damage, I don't have any beef with him. So we pass laws. Now here's the way law works. Hasn't crime always grown by 5% a year? Now I'm 43 years old. I was born in 1939, and all I know, like Will Rogers once said, is what I read in the papers. But here's the way this comes down. From the earliest time that I can remember reading the paper, I can see where crime increases by a certain percentage, about 5% a year. Isn't it pretty much that way wherever you are in Cleveland or Philadelphia or New York? That's the way it is here. So, in order to combat that crime, what do the police departments and the FBI and the officials that are in charge of crime and prevention and, you know, the people that deal in crime, what do they tell you? We need more police, more laws, and more money. Now, isn't that about what you hear in Cleveland, Philadelphia, New York? Well, I don't know what you hear there, but that's what they tell us here. Well, now, here in Boise, Idaho, we have 100 policemen. All right. And crime is at A level. Let's call it level 50. Okay? We want to reduce crime from level 50 to 0. That's no crime. We want every policeman, every sheriff, every lawyer, every judge in the state of Idaho unemployed. That's our goal. I want every single law enforcement officer off the payroll and out doing something that's productive. We want absolutely no crime whatsoever. We want every citizen obeying every law. And to do this, to achieve this goal, to combat and to curb crime, we are going to educate people in the schools and the churches. We're going to educate them on television, and we're going to educate them in our jails, and we're going to convert everybody to total 100% obedience to all laws at all time without any exceptions whatsoever, and throw every law enforcement person out of a job in a certain period of time. All right? That's our goal. To accomplish this, we've got to increase the police budget by 5%. So let's say we're spending $10 million a year. Let's increase it 5%. We've got to increase our police force from 100 to 105. That's 5%. We have on our books 1,000 laws. So what we're going to do is increase the laws by 5%. That's so that the police will have more tools with which to combat crime, right? And we're going to give them 5% more police cars. Okay? Now, instead of 100 policemen out there on the road, we got 105. Now, we tell the policeman that in order to justify his job, he has to make, in an 8-hour shift, 4 contacts with the public. Right? In order for the guy to justify his job, doesn't he have to write 4 tickets? Or doesn't he have to arrest 4 criminals? Doesn't he have to do something to justify his job? Now, doesn't that sound then like we're creating crime? Aren't we really in effect doing this? Every time we increase the budget by 5%, the police by 5%, aren't we really increasing crime by 5%? Because if there aren't some real criminals out there who are bad types, then we've got to have other issues like drunks on the road so that our policemen can have something to do. Don't they have a vested interest in this? Don't the sheriffs and the jailers and all of these law enforcement people have a vested interest in trying to keep crime going? You know, I don't want to pay $75,000 to put somebody in prison for 5 years because he's drunk, or because he's an alcoholic, because he's sick. But for some reason, we've got it in our minds that that's what we've got to do. You know, really all I want to do is to be protected from criminals. And I don't need any policeman to protect me from criminals because I carry a gun. Now, I know that right away you're going to say, oh, he carries a gun. That's right. Our founding fathers understood crime. That's why the Second Amendment's in our Constitution. The police cannot prevent crime. You tell me one rape that the policemen ever prevented. Policemen catch rapists after they've committed the crime. I'll tell you how to solve the rape problem. They did that down in Florida. They did it up in Minneapolis one time. What they did is they went on a campaign and they started arming women. I've said it a dozen times. I'll say it again. You put a .25 automatic in the purse of every woman in America and there will be no more rape. It's the end of the argument. One of 2 or 3 things has to happen. Number 1, the women kill all the rapists. If the women killed all the rapists, then there wouldn't be any more rape, would there? Isn't that logical? If there's 10,000 rapists in America, I don't know how many there are, let's say there's 10,000. If we killed all 10,000 of them, there wouldn't be any more. If we killed 5,000 of them, I'll bet you the other 5,000 would soon become reformed rapists and we wouldn't have any more rape. What we do is we disarm all the citizens. We tell them that if you've got to have a gun permit to carry this gun. We take all the guns away from the citizens. Now, the citizen can't protect himself and the policeman's not there. How many rapists run out and say, hold it, officer, come on over here, I'm going to rape this woman, I want you here to catch me? When did that ever happen? I never saw that. And so rape goes up every year, and armed robbery goes up every year. I remember down in Oakland, California, there was a liquor store owner down there. He had a gun, and he killed 3 robbers. Bang, bang, bang. He kept getting robbed all the time. Got a gun, killed 3. Didn't have any more robberies. You know, there was some blood there for a while, and I'm sure that some of these ladies will shoot their feet off and shoot their husbands and have some accidents, and there'll be some blood, and the bleeding hearts will come out and say, my God, we've got to take all these guns away from people. Well, the problem with people today is they don't know how to handle guns. Well, I'm not here on some kick to get you to arm yourself because I don't really care. What I'm trying to do is in this segment, this is lesson 1, I'm trying to show you where crime is, and I'm trying to show you where status is. I'm trying to show you what the root cause of our problem is. And then as we progress through these 30 lessons, how you go in on that courtroom floor and how you win every time. Because if you're going to go in there and you're going to lose every time, then there is no advantage to going into the courtroom. Citizens who go into the courtroom go in there with stark terror. I mean literally. An average guy going into a traffic court, he's in there, I want to plead guilty, Your Honor, with explanation. Let me tell you why I'm guilty and why I'm sorry and why this happened. So you'll give me a $25 fine instead of a $35 fine. Why doesn't he go in there and say, I haven't committed any crime and I'm not going to plead to this, I'm standing mute. And if the government wants to spend $2,000 convicting me, then so be it. My attitude is, sir, that any crime that's important enough for my government to prosecute is important enough for me to defend. Now, that's my attitude. I carry a gun because I don't need policemen to protect me. I don't need to spend millions of dollars in tax money out here paying people to drive up and down the streets with badges on their chests, in nifty uniforms, carrying guns on their hip, acting as hired guns. I don't need it. Why would I need it? I dare you to come rob me. I'll tell you one thing, robbing me can get real hazardous to your health. If we had 200 million red-blooded Americans all carrying a gun under their shirt, there wouldn't be any armed robbers. There wouldn't be any armed robbers. The only reason you've got armed robbers is because you've got citizens that don't have guns and can't kill them. That's why you've got armed robbers. You know, there was a time, about 1900, I think every man in the country carried a gun. I came from a family, I don't remember how many guns my dad had. Well, he must have had 10 or 15. I can't ever remember a time living in a house didn't have a gun in it. My house has got 10 guns in it now. And you know, I talk to people all the time that not only don't have guns, they're afraid of them. And I'm sitting here going, you're afraid of a gun? Don't you know how to use one? Haven't you been in the Army? Didn't they teach you in the Army how to use a gun? And people come back from the Army, they don't have guns. Women don't have guns. Women get raped all the time. They get abused all the time. Well, let me tell you, your founding fathers knew how to solve that problem, and they wrote that right into your Constitution. Because that's a right, it's inalienable, and it can't be taken away from you. You can give it up. You can give up a right, but it cannot be taken away from you. Now, that's the difference between status at law and privilege under contract. I would say that starting about 1900, we began a shift away from our natural inalienable rights. I remember falling into that syndrome about 1965. I think it was about 1965. Somebody got it in my head that the way to make money and be successful in life was to get into debt. Borrow money, pyramid, buy, sell, trade, and become a businessman. And boy, let me tell you, all I had was misery the entire time. I was in debt, and I was a slave, and I was a servant, and I paid taxes. And my government was after me constantly for not paying my taxes. Gosh, I couldn't afford to pay my taxes. I could barely afford to make keep ends meeting. And I think that most of you have the same problem. And then one day I began to find out, well, what is my problem? What's the root cause of my problem? Well, the root cause of my problem is my status. I'm a slave. I'm a servant. I'm in the constitutional sense, a subject and a member of society, not a sovereign and a natural person who is a lawmaker instead of a law obeyer. You know, law has to be made for people who cannot govern themselves. You have to have rules for Toby when he's driving the horses to town. Don't whip the horses, don't speed and stop for white ladies as they're crossing the road. Isn't that the rule of the master concerning Toby the slave? So the insurance company does that to us. They say, don't you whip the horses in that car and drive over 55 because there's a possibility that you might cause an accident, which would then make us liable and we'd have to pay these damages. You see where you're at? Master-servant relationship. You know, the root cause of our problem then is whether or not we're willing to be responsible for our actions. I think that's where the bottom line is. Most people want limited liability for debt. They want limited responsibility. And the insurance agents, boy, let me tell you, if they can't preach a sermon to you about, well, you know what'll happen to you if you get in this accident? Well, you could lose your house, you could lose this, you could lose that, or one thing and another. Well, certainly you could. Well, why don't you go out and learn how your courtroom works? What's wrong with learning how to be a responsible person? When you cause a damage, you have to pay for it. But if you don't cause a damage, why should you be paying money into an insurance fund to cover the damages and the irresponsibilities of other people? That's what the insurance fund's all about. And the insurance company pays out about 5%. So you pay $10 million in and they pay, what, $9.5 million out, and they make $9.5 million profit, and they pay about $500,000 out. I think that's about what the ratio is. Somebody told me that insurance companies pay out about 5% and take the rest in as profit and commissions and etc. I say, poppycock, I can spend that money on myself, my share, just as well as they can. I don't need anybody to spend my money. I was 37 before I learned how to count. Once I learned how to count, I fired my accountant. And I try to encourage other people to learn how to count also. Now, in recapitulation then, when you get in on that courtroom floor, if you want common law rights, then you have to be responsible at the common law. We're going to talk about the scene of the crime, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. We're going to show you classroom scenes here of arraignments, probable cause hearing, felonies, misdemeanors, traffic tickets. We're going to show you in detail how you go into the courtroom to learn that language. There's some words, terms, phrases. There's rules and regulations that you have to learn. But the way I see this, it's about the equivalent of learning how to fly. If you can learn how to fly an airplane, you can learn how to be a free common law man. You can learn courtroom strategy and procedure. You can learn how to get into that courtroom and demand your rights at law. But in order to do that, the first thing you have to do is to change your status at law. I'm going to show you how to win if you've got a driver's license. I'll show you that even if you're wrong, you can still win. I don't recommend that. I'm not saying that you should get on the left side of the issue and then go into the courtroom and win your case. I'm not telling people go out and get drunk and drive down the road, and even if you've got a driver's license, I'll show you how to win. Although I can do that. I've done it and I've demonstrated it for a long time, about 5 years. We don't have any students here at Orson's Inn of Barristry who have lost a case. Not a one. Every graduate from this school knows how to win because he knows how to conduct the scene of the crime. And what I try to teach people to do, for instance, in taxes, you know how many people that the government's laying away every year on income tax evasion and willful failure to file, etc. Okay, I can teach you how to win those cases, but wouldn't it be better if you corrected your status and you didn't even owe the tax? You know, some years ago, I dropped out of the income tax system, and I've never even had an audit. I go to audits all the time. I go with people that have tax problems that just want to make you cry. I mean, they're attaching their property and taking their homes and leaving them with barely enough money. And in some cases, they don't even leave them with enough money to buy food, and they've got wives and children. I don't know how in the world the government can do that and how these tax agents do it, and it makes you sad. So what I want to do, and I've told people this, and I'm going to tell you now, you should start in not with a drunk driving case, that's coming to trial next week. Because let me tell you, boy, if you're going to trial next week and you're a novice and you don't understand what you're doing and your status is wrong and you've got a driver's license and you've already made admissions and confessions and they're going to use them against you and you're on the videotape down at the police station and you've made these confessions, it's going to be tough. It's going to be awful hard for you to win. What I like to see is a student who's clean, who comes in and says, yeah, I'm a taxpayer now, but I want to stop paying taxes. You set the deal up for next year. You go ahead and you pay your taxes this year. And you get rid of your checking accounts and your credit cards and your obligations. And you start paying off your debts and you get clean with the world. And then you drop out of the system in a logical, systematic way. And they don't even miss you. You're just gone. And all of a sudden, from taxpayer to non-taxpayer, from paying 25% of your total productivity to your government to squander on Poland guaranteeing Polish debt that your international bankers made. Put the money in the bank. Well, I'm kidding you there. Put the money in your sock or buy gold or silver or do whatever you want with it. You don't have to send your money to Poland. You don't have to pay your money out in property taxes. You don't have to pay that money unless you want to. You don't have to have a driver's license. You don't have to be a slave to the traffic cop. You don't have to run down the road in fear and trepidation. And judges understand law. Your Supreme Court understands law. I see the problem is I don't think a lot of us citizens out here understand our Constitution. And the first building block to becoming a sovereign is to get your status straight. Once you get that status squared around, you're going to find that about 75% of your legal problems are just going to evaporate and disappear. Now, that doesn't mean that your government isn't going to harass you and that they're not going to charge you falsely, because let me tell you, when you become a competent pro se litigant and you become what they call me as a constitutionalist, you go out here in jail and you know what they call me? Hey, he's one of those constitutionalists. I had a policeman say that the other day and they were booking me in. Oh, they're trying to book me in. You mean you're not a constitutionalist? Conversation broke right down. The policeman didn't want to admit he wasn't, but I'm one of those. They call me a constitutionalist like I'm a communist or a Nazi or a queer or a sex pervert or something, They have to hang a label on me. Slaves are that way, They have to hang a label so they can identify you. They don't know what a free man looks like. They've never seen one before. And so they don't know what a free man is, and it's a strange and foreign doctrine to them, this thing of driving without a driver's license, driving a car without license plates, building a house without your government's permission, owning something free and clear and absolute allodial freehold, fee simple. How many people do you know like that? When I was a kid, there were a lot of them, but there's not very many of those anymore. I bet you there's not more than 1 million or 2 Americans left in the United States that aren't in debt. Tell me a farmer. Show me a farmer somewhere that isn't in hock. These farmers out here, they owe $500 to $700 to $1 million. I remember I used to be in the cattle business, and we were in debt back in the 50s and 60s, but it used to be when I was a young man, the objective was you borrowed $30,000 from production credit and you tried to get it paid off within the terms of your first lease, and then you were free and clear, and then you were out making money. Something's happened where our land is mortgaged to the government. I don't know if there's very much land. I'll bet you not only does the government own 1/3 of all of America, well, they claim to. That's another subject matter. Of the public land, they claim to own that too. But I'll bet you that the government probably owns 90% of all the private land in America. We like to think of ourselves as property owners. Why, we're not a nation of property owners. We're a nation of people who are indentured in feudal serfdom. And we've done it to ourselves voluntarily. We have voluntarily taken on this debt and squandered it. Look at our national debt. Look at our mortgages. Look at our local debt and our government debt. Nobody complains about debt. Why, people have been led to believe that debt's wonderful and good. Let me tell you, debt is slavery. It's just that simple. Debt is slavery in Scripture. Debt is slavery in practical everyday application. Debt is slavery in law. And when you walk in on that courtroom floor, that judge assumes that you're a merchant and trader in equitable debt. He doesn't assume you're a free man walking in there demanding common law rights. He assumes that you're a merchant and trader in equity that has an equitable interest in some piece of property or some issue, and you're coming into the courtroom to throw yourself on the mercy of the court to have them decide how to divide up your marriage. Have you ever seen a divorce at common law? Show me a divorce with a jury. You ever seen one of those? Well, you're starting to see one or two once in a while. They're called palimony suits. You know, when this fellow Lee Marvin broke up with his common law wife, you had a common law divorce. That is so strange and bizarre, so foreign, the news media picked that up and said, here's a new milestone in law in America. Nothing new. That's the common law working. That woman had a right to what she claimed. Absolute allodial freehold right and claim at law on what his property was. He's sitting there going, well, this can't be right. I'm not even married to her. We've got people in Ada County that can get married without a marriage license. Why, I just heard of one the other day. Young fellow went out with this lady and they had this nice wedding, and they couldn't get a preacher to come over there and marry him because, you know, preachers are licensed. You talk about separation of church and state, show it to me. Don't believe it for a minute. We don't have separation of church and state. The government licenses all the preachers. You show me a preacher in America that's not licensed by his government. I don't know of any. Oh, I'm not saying there aren't any. There's probably a few of them out there. But as a general rule, the churches are all corporate organizations. Where do you get corporate privilege? Well, in Idaho, in this county, you go up to Pete Cinerusa, who's our Secretary of State, and you take out a corporate charter. And so the churches are corporations. They're regulated then by the government. All the preachers are licensed by the government. They're doing something that would otherwise be illegal. Since when is it illegal to be a preacher without the government's permission? I don't claim to be a preacher, but I'll tell you one thing. I sure as hell don't need my government's permission to tell me whether or not I can or can't be. I don't need my government's permission to do anything. I'm the sovereign, not my government. And when you learn to be the sovereign, then you can learn to be free. When you go into a court in your county, and you're going to find this to be true, the first few times you walk in there, those judges are going to be shocked right out of their gourd when you walk in and demand all of your rights at law. Listen to this. Your Honor, I demand all of my rights at law, and I don't waive any of my rights at any time. And I'm not coming in here to grovel before you to explain to you why I'm guilty. I'm here to tell you that no crime has been committed, and I'm not going to plead to this cause of action. There is no cause of action before this court. Driving 80 miles an hour down the road is not against the law. I haven't broken any law. There's no corpus delicti. There's no loss to anybody involved here. And there's no contract. There's no penal clause. Why, the poor judges are sitting back there wondering what kind of strange and foreign, bizarre behavior is this of this fool coming into this courtroom who doesn't plead guilty. Not one person in 100 walks in and pleads not guilty. And if you took 100 people who pled not guilty, there isn't one of those in 100 that could go in and competently argue his position at law. He goes in and claims, well, I didn't do the act. What's he saying? He's saying, well, yeah, I was driving the car and I've got the driver's license and the government commissioned me to go out there on that road, but I wasn't going 80. I was only going 65. I wasn't breaking the speed limit by 25 miles an hour. I was only breaking the speed limit by 10, and it's for that reason that I'm pleading not guilty. He can't even shut up and keep his mouth shut. He's got to spill the beans and go into the courtroom and show the court that he's guilty of doing something, even if it isn't what he really did. And that's the problem that our citizenry has. In the last 80 years, we've moved from status to contract. We're all of us operating in equity. We've got marriage licenses, and so we have children that are owned by our government and controlled. Take your 10-year-old kid out of school and find out what your government does to you. Start educating and training and teaching your own children in your own home and find out what your government is going to say to you. I'll bet you that you haven't got the nerve to go in there to that school and tell the principal, I'm taking my kid out of school, dummy. I don't think you're doing a very good job here. Think I'll just take him home, teach him myself. Try that one. Your government tells you when to come in and it tells you when to go out. It tells you when to get up and it tells you when to go to bed. And you know that's true, and I know that's true, and we've all lived through it. We were all raised, educated, taught, and trained in the same government educational system. They taught you how to use the executive and legislative branches of government. They taught you that redress of grievance comes by writing letters to the editor and picketing up and down in front of the State House to get redress of grievance and writing letters to your congressman. Poppycock, balderdash, baloney, and phooey. You get redress of grievance if you're a free man on the courtroom floor by being a belligerent claimant in person and demanding it. You walk into that courtroom and you demand your rights. You don't go in there like a groveling slave named Toby to plead and beg and whine and wheedle before the master and say, oh, please, massa, don't beat me, don't whip me, massa. Isn't that what a slave does? He understands and recognizes his status. He isn't ignorant. You know, we citizens of the United States think we're free, and we tell each other we're free, and we kid ourselves that we're free, and our government propagandizes us and tells us that we're free. But I'll tell you, the status of a free man is the man that doesn't have to show his driver's license to some officer on the road to drive. The status of a free man is a man that can work and earn a living and doesn't need a number or somebody's permission to work. A free man is a man who educates his children at home or sends them to school or to any school that he wants to, whether the government likes it or not. A free man then acts as a matter of right, not as a matter of privilege.